All right. Ready?
I'm ready. I'm ready.
Okay, cool. All right. Welcome to the Global Conscious Project podcast. My name's Nicola. I'm your host and I am the founder of the Global Conscious Project. Today I'm with Lisa Bow, who is an art therapist, a healer, a jack of all trades. She's incredible. And we're here to talk about spiritual emergence and spiritual emergency. And yeah, very excited to have you on today. Would you like to just start by introducing yourself?
Sure. So as Nicola said, I'm Lisa and I'm a transpersonal art therapist. And I've also worked a lot in sort of Reiki, healing of all sorts, studied a lot in that area. And also now my main passion, I guess, my main thing that I just love to talk about is spiritual emergence, spiritual crisis. And that flows on from like personal experiences in that area. And yeah, that's sort of me in a nutshell.
What exactly is spiritual emergence?
Sure. So in my eyes, I've written a little ditty down just to give us a starting point. So spiritual crisis is basically a crisis of spiritual awakening. So when we're going through a spiritual awakening, sometimes it doesn't always go like a simple going from here, a linear, like from here to here, A to B. Sometimes you can start the process and then it takes you on a little bit of a journey where you actually can sometimes feel a bit fearful and unsure and, oh, is this meant to be happening? So I guess everyone's spiritual experiences are different. So we could focus on different types, but basically it can happen if you are actively engaged on a spiritual path, but it can also come out of the blue, even if you aren't into spirituality. So I find that really interesting too. So you might not even have read a spiritual text, you might not have even, spoken to someone about spirituality, but you may have one of these experiences.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I love that because I've seen this diagram of a spiritual awakening, and it's basically just a circle, and it's like there's 5 stages and it's basically a never-ending circle. So I think a lot of people think that spiritual awakening like happens and you end up like going on this beautiful process of high vibration, like raising your vibration, and like it's this beautiful love and light and all of this amazing stuff. But actually it's like it's never a linear process, I don't think. And I really like that kind of diagram because it's like, I think people have this expectation that's what it's going to be like, and when it's not, they're kind of like hit really hard by it. And that's exactly what you're talking about, like a spiritual crisis. And I also think that like we're all spiritual beings, no matter if we're like spiritually inclined or not. So yeah, I like that a spiritual crisis can happen even if you don't even know that you're a spiritual person.
Totally. That's right. And so some of us might go into it and we've never read about it. We've never heard anyone else's experience. So and this can kind of, I think this is what can make maybe the crisis part a little scarier, because it's like, oh, I'm having this experience, but I've never heard of anyone else having this experience, especially if you're a younger person. You might just be dabbling in something. I'll just try out Reiki. I'll just try out this. I'll just do a week of it. I'll do 2 weeks of it. No, let's not stop. And then it's like, oh, something can open, we all know things can take hold of us in different ways. And so it's talking through, well, I guess having knowledge about some of those things is a good before you interact in certain practices, to really read a lot about it, get your bearings, and then slow like to start rather than diving in sometimes. But I think that's where you learn the most lessons too. So I probably wouldn't say either or, but it's like you've got to just be a little bit aware.
Yeah, definitely. And I think like every person is going to have a different experience of that. And I think we all kind of just, when we first start out on a spiritual journey or a spiritual awakening, we all kind of feel like, oh, if we tick each box, then, it will just be this beautiful process. But I think like every person's boxes are different, and it's not about ticking the boxes. It's about exploring as far as you can into each area that you need to, and then like healing those things and then moving forward. So yeah, I think that's really a really good way to think about it too.
Yeah, that's true. And sometimes you might, for instance, it's like the universe is looking after you in some ways. Like, say you're reading a book and it gives you an insight or an understanding of something, and then you try a little bit of that out, but then you find the next book or the next thing, and then you go on that path, and then it's just like it never, that's where I guess it never stops. You're always learning, you're always growing, and then you may have bumps along the way, and some of those bumps can be quite full on. So maybe we'll talk a bit about that.
Yeah.
Because some of those bumps can be like, you know, I don't know if I'm okay anymore. I don't know what's solid and what's not, because I've really gone to some different places. And so that can happen to people. And I think that's just where I'm most fascinated by that. And that's probably because I've had similar experiences to that. But I certainly wasn't knowledgeable in it either. So I had no groundwork, no understanding of what I was experiencing. And so it's only been so my kind of thing is that I learned about art therapy, and in my art therapy study we learn about spiritual crisis. So this was about 10 years ago. And when my eyes were just popping out of my head, just going, oh my God, is this even real? I just, you know, I'd read a lot of stuff, but I couldn't see the link. I couldn't see this link between some of the mental health issues we can have, where it's sort of like it can resemble both. It can resemble a spiritual crisis, and it can sometimes resemble, people might look at us and go, oh, you're not doing too well. But actually, if they understood where you might have been traveling, what was going on, they may have been able to support you in that experience, but they weren't to know. And that's understandable. Like, no one gives you a guidebook to life and says, hey, this might happen along the way, just be careful. Especially when you're younger, you've no idea what you're doing. So my understanding of all this really opened my eyes to, oh wow, changed my whole, you know, my whole outlook on life changed once I realized this.
Yes, so I actually talked about this in my last podcast as well, and the connection between mental illness specifically, but also other illnesses as well, to spiritual awakening, and like how you fit into this world, and who you are in this world as well, and how, like, as a society we're not really geared towards thinking about it from a spiritual perspective. Like, a lot of people don't even know that spirituality even exists. And so as a spiritual being, it can be quite hard when you're put into that box of mental illness, or you're diagnosed with a mental illness, because no one's quite understanding you. So yeah, I definitely had that experience too. Yeah. So what are the symptoms of a spiritual crisis?
Yeah. Well, have I got the triggers down first? Can we start with maybe the triggers, and then we can move into how that looks, sort of thing. So some of the triggers that cause, okay, hang on, let me see if I've written this down correctly. Where did I write that? We can edit, can't we?
Yeah.
Okay.
But I'm probably going to keep that in because you're being real. I love that.
You just love all the
I love all the imperfect moments. They're great.
Yeah. This is totally imperfect. Okay, well, I can list them off the top of my head.
Yeah, go.
Let's say some of the triggers might be you might be having an experience of a trauma that you've experienced in your life. You may be reliving that. You may be, you know, a memory might come to you, and suddenly you're back in your inner child, or that, and that could like take you over in some sort of sense. So it could be a trigger for you to go within, and you may start dabbling in a certain few things, and then all of a sudden you don't know where you are anymore. You've sort of lost track of being grounded, potentially, because you've sort of gone off on a little journey somewhere where you weren't prepared, you didn't have the tools. Triggers also, I guess, might just be any sort of crisis in your life. So you might have had a breakup with your partner, you may have lost a loved one, you might have been doing a fast. That's a big one. People fast sometimes for way too long.
Wow.
And on purpose, sometimes they actually fast so they can have these spiritual experiences, and that's great if you want to try. I'm not giving any coding on that, but I'm just saying that can happen. That can definitely happen. So definitely any crisis, anything that's shaking you, a car accident, God, there's so many things people can go through. Yeah, anything where you're just shaken from your foundations, that can be one of the main triggers. And then it might be really simple things like you're reading a book and you might just have read something so powerful that you sort of just stop dead in your tracks, and then you might sort of drift away. Who knows? There's so many different ways it can happen, and because I think you're almost at that point already, and so these experiences just push you over the edge sometimes, if you know what I mean.
They say that massive life they say that massive life changes are big triggers for this kind of thing as well, like moving, job loss or job change, like arguments or fallouts with your family or friends, all of those things, new relationships ending, all of those things.
That's right.
Yeah,
it can
cool.
be a really simple or a really complicated thing, but they're like, I guess, the basic things. And what I've written down for that, so I mustn't have written the triggers, but what I wrote down for that to give people an idea if they notice someone is going into a space or they've had an experience like that, and then they might seem a little bit out of sorts, but you're not quite sure, and they might be telling you things that you're sort of like, oh, that kind of fits into this box, but it might also fit into this box. So what I've written down is it's crucial. What is crucial to the individual who is beginning to space out, they may be spacing out in some way, is the emotional response of the person in his surroundings. If they are appalled or bewildered or afraid, then the individual in the plight feels himself isolated, alone, and panic can seize him. So yes, that's really my main message.
Yes.
How to support someone when they're going through those states is really, really important, and it is on the people around them to really support them in that. So it's everybody's responsibility to learn what this is.
Yeah.
Because it's like,
there's nothing worse when you're in a moment of like loss, I guess, when you feel really lost, and like that can be caused by anything, and then the people around you don't quite see it or see how you're feeling, which of course is like the definition of mental illness. Like like people can't see what's going on in your head, so it is also up to you to be able to express that, I think, as well. But I think just knowing that there's people out there who've been through the same thing as what you're going through is really, really comforting. I found that really helpful when I was in like some of my deepest, darkest moments. But of course, that doesn't always come when you need them most, and it can often come like years later, and then you're like, oh, actually my experience isn't actually that uncommon. It's very, very common, and most people have been through it. So yeah, I think it's really good to be able to share around that too. But it's whoa.
Definitely. Asking people around you, your closest friends, have they ever experienced something similar? Doing a little bit of research online if they're able to, even friends doing it for friends, like, oh, they're saying this or doing this, maybe I'll give this a search. And I find often it's also about, what that person brings up, and even if it doesn't sound normal to you or it doesn't sound logical, it's like often it is their, symbols are coming up, archetypal images might be coming up, past traumas might be coming up, and it's very hard to put that in sort of a, you can't stop it once it starts. Sometimes if you're open, that may just start to come through. And so that person might be saying something, you might go, oh, well, then, they're saying this particular thing. It's not something I can just go find in a book, or, I can't find that line anywhere else, but I'll be curious, and I'll sit with them and I'll ask them more questions if they're willing, and give them a chance to process whatever they're going through.
Yeah, absolutely. And so for my listeners who have never heard
Yes.
of archetypes, please
Yeah, sure.
could you explain those?
Okay, so I guess there's many archetypes, and archetypes are something, I guess my favorite author when it comes to archetypes would be Joseph Campbell, and he studied comparative religion. And so his study was basically to look at all the religions around the world and see the similarities and synchronicities of their stories. So when he looked at those, he saw archetypes of all different sorts appearing in all these different religions. So it's like a universal, it's kind of like a collective unconscious that we are all in, creating symbols and stories that we can all actually resonate with. And so I guess that's why we all resonate with folk stories, with fairy tales. That's where a lot of the archetypal imagery comes in. And, certain authors might talk about there only being 7 or there being 12, but there's actually probably hundreds of them. And like we all kind of embody some or another, and some of them might be like, I think in our last one we talked about the nurturer. The nurturer can be one, the hero. Where else? Do you want to throw a few at me as well? There's so many.
Yeah, I don't actually know much about the archetype system, but like obviously the concept is pretty straightforward. Like it's just different. I guess it's just different personality traits that are kind of common. Would you say common amongst people?
Yeah.
And so lots of people are nurturers, lots of people are heroes, lots of people are I don't know, A-type personalities where they're really like gung-ho. Yeah.
There's one other one called the hedonist, and then there's the child. They're all types that we've already lived through. And so I guess and some people say that we're living a certain few at a certain time. So right now we might be living 3 or 4 of them, and then next year we might be living another 3 or 4 of them, depending on where we're at. So it's just a thing you can be mindful of or do a bit of research on to understand what archetypes are, because it all feeds into kind of what we're talking about now as well.
Yeah, okay. So how does that impact like a spiritual awakening, or how does that feed into a spiritual awakening?
Well, I guess if you'd never read about it before, and then if you were having a spiritual emergence, spiritual awakening, you probably wouldn't see it. You may not understand it. So, but if you had read about archetypes, what would happen is that as you're going through your spiritual awakening, you would probably be accessing some of those archetypes, looking to them, reading about them. For instance, a woman might look into goddesses and the different types of goddesses, and they're another version of archetypes as well, so they might go, I feel like I'm accessing this archetype right now. What can I do to understand that archetype a bit more, because it's playing itself out in my world right now? So you might go down that path with it. So that's how we can use archetypes, is really just a tool to understand the part of the life journey that we're on right now, so that we can kind of move through that archetype if we need to, or basically bring it into our lives, almost invoke it, so that we can learn its lessons and live it out a bit.
Yeah, okay, that's really cool. And so obviously as you go through the cycle of spiritual awakening, like you would need different archetypes at different times.
Yes,
yeah,
definitely.
okay.
Because at the beginning you might be the innocent, you might be the child who really is totally unaware of really maybe what's going on, and you have no clue. And then you're coming around, like you say, there's all these different stages. And then when you're in maybe the darker sort of transformative part, what would you be then? I mean, there's so many you could pick. So, it's the underworld really. So what's in the underworld, you might think of, what's that? There's a story, the pomegranate. God, now I can't think of its name. But anyway, there's so many that you could look at for that particular type of the journey. And then you'd learn more about that, and then you'd go up, and then you'd have the hero up here somewhere. So, but there's so many other little stages along the way that you'd have to go through as well.
Yeah,
So
okay.
yeah, so many.
Cool. That's awesome. Sorry, my Ibrahim just came in the back door then. I was going to ask you another question. Oh yeah, so what can happen, like what is your opinion on what happens when we're taking in too much of those information, or we might be like intellectualizing our spiritual awakening a lot rather than writing it out? Like, what do you think about that?
Yeah, intellectualizing it. I guess you've got to have a balance. So I would say, if you're looking to understand what's going on, yes, I would say read about it. So, for instance, at the end of this, I can share some books that helped me to understand my experiences and just got me into the idea that, hey, there's all these people that have either been through this, who understand how to move through it, that there are resources, that there's a worldwide movement, so not movement, but there's a whole lot of people talking about it. So I guess, yes, that's the important part of intellectualizing, understanding. So if someone asks you, you don't want to sound too woo-woo. You might be like, hey, I've read all these books and I actually do really understand it from quite a research perspective, because it's, you can go right back into history and see this all through history of people going on these journeys. So I would say you've got to have the intellectual part, and then you've got to have your unconscious, your inner part that's actually then really doing the work of what it's showing you. So when you read, say, maybe from the intellectual side, it might give you ideas or thoughts or tips and tricks and exercises to do, but I think you do need to go slow. So in the beginning you might get really excited and you want to try everything. So I would say, if you're in the beginning stages of this, you would probably pick one thing pick one modality or one area of interest, and then explore that, and maybe also have a guide with you, or just someone you really trust that can help you if you catch a snag, if you're not really sure what's happening, just to ask somebody who you think is knowledgeable in that area.
Yeah, definitely. Because I find often I get really excited or really like, oh my gosh, I need to learn all about this. But then there's like 7 things that I want to learn all about. And so, yeah. And so then I'm like, oh, I find myself that I've gotten too far into the intellectualizing it. And then I have to actively bring myself back to feeling within my being, because otherwise it's just, you get too overwhelmed with it all.
Yeah, because it could be just all then what tends to happen maybe is that it floats all around and you have all this information incoming, and then you feel quite overwhelmed by it. And then sometimes what happens is you just say stop to everything because you just literally can't take any. And that can be good though too, to say, and then people talk about, when they do meditation and when they do certain practices, that, it is good to do, and you choose how much you're going to do per day and you engage in it, but also to be mindful that sometimes meditation might not be good at certain times. So you've got to really be mindful, like, yes, I've meditated for 5 hours today, maybe that's too much, or, and I know not everyone does that, but I'm just saying that, there's certain things we engage in and we might think we're loving it and we go down that path, but it's just important to, ground yourself often and keep it all in perspective.
Yeah, and I think like there's a lot of, you have to be very self-aware and very reflective to know when you've got to that point of saturation, or when you've got to that, before you get to the point ideally, but often it doesn't happen like that. Like you have to be very self-aware and very, just like knowing exactly how you're feeling all the time, to know when you need to stop taking in information and just rest and let it all sink, and then let your reaction to that information come. Like I think that's been a massive turning point in my spiritual journey as well, because I had so many expectations that I would be able to learn everything, and then I would be woke, and that's just not how it works. Like, no. So I think learning how to rest, and like guilt-free rest, and learning how to like let those things sink in, and not have the pressure on yourself to be always learning or always implementing or always like moving forward, because sometimes a step backwards or a standstill is just as important as moving forward. Yeah, that's my experience anyway.
Yeah, I definitely agree, because you probably spend a lot of time thinking you have to keep progressing and there's always more to learn, and you want to just keep diving in, and that's good. Keep the curiosity alive, but at the same time, you know that you're going to have to take breaks, because there might be a tipping point where you go, oh, I've really done too much work. I've sort of overdone myself. And then if you notice those signs that you're in that kind of nervous, anxious state, or you are feeling overwhelmed, then okay, probably best to have a break for a week.
Yeah.
Just take wheel things back a little bit.
Yeah, definitely. And I think especially with coronavirus, there's a lot of people really realizing that, like, they've got this opportunity to slow down, and a lot of people are really taking that into their own hands. And like, I've treated a lot of people in my massage business and they're like, oh, I don't really know if I want to go out anymore. Like, when the pubs reopen, I don't think I want to go and party. Like, I don't want to go and do this. I don't want to go and do that. I just want to like rest and recuperate. And I think that's really, really good for our society. I say this all the time. I just think it's so powerful to be able to do that. And yeah, it's like really, really good for everyone to be able to do that.
Yeah, it's like this massive contemplation period that we've never really had before, because we've always felt that we are just go, go, go. We don't get breaks to feel that we are allowed to have a break in a way. It's really strange, because when people give you permission to actually stay at home, and people have been saying, you're right, people have been saying, now I've got the greatest excuse. I don't have to do this. I don't have to do that, because I don't really want it. I like just being in my own space for a little while. For a change.
I know. And also, I don't think we all realize that actually we're in control of our own lives anyway. Like, sometimes those expectations are just so big that you're kind of like, oh, I'm not actually in control of my own life. And to take that power back is really, really important. And I think this has definitely taught us that.
Yeah. Definitely, yeah, because now I think everything we do, I'm finding this in myself, that we're more mindful. I think I was always fairly mindful anyway, but the thing is, when you go to respond to a text, when you go to respond to an email, someone rings you and you're busy, you've just got to say to yourself, hey, it's okay. I'll respond when I can. I'll ring that person when I can. The world's not going to, fall apart if I don't respond straight away, And I think probably we were all learning that it is okay just to take a break, and it just eases the mind. I find that helps me, because I don't like feeling this rushness. It's like, no, I want to go, here's my day, I set a time, this amount of time to do the things I want to do, and if things are rushing in, I just have to go, I'll respond, but when I'm ready. And right now it's like, that's fairly obvious that most people are needing that.
That's really powerful, because you can't really control what goes on outside of you, so things are always going to be rushing in. So to be able to say, actually, no, I don't want to do that right now, or maybe never. I don't ever want to do that, like, that's totally fine. So is there any last tips or anything that you would like to part as words of wisdom?
Well, as I look at my list, I realised I didn't cover a lot of what we wanted to cover, so maybe we can do part 2, because we didn't even talk about the main types of the spiritual emergency and what that looks like. And so in my mind, I'm like, wow, there's definitely room for another like ongoing. But let me have a look. What else can I say? I think it kind of goes back to what we were talking about, what I brought up before, about being mindful of other people's experiences as well as your own. So if you're noticing somebody might need support in this area, that's the wisdom I have to share, is to be calm about it and just sit with them to process if they can, and allow their process to unfold without giving your fear or onto that person if they're having these experiences where it's more of a breakdown than a breakthrough. They may be in the breakdown stage where they're not sure what's going on. And right now, a lot of people are probably going through some version of that, you know, somewhere on the scale. So I would say it's for everyone around everyone, and to be mindful of yourself, that when those things happen, just to be kind, to be, you know, allowing, and not to jump to any conclusions that the person is unwell in a way you may think they are, but they actually just may be going through an experience that, you know, they just don't know how to process at that time, and all they need is your love and support. So
yeah,
that's probably the biggest thing I can say.
Yeah, cool. And what about if we're the ones going through a spiritual crisis?
Sorry, what was that?
If we're the ones going through a spiritual crisis.
Oh, if we're the ones. Yeah. So if we're the ones going through it, I guess what I would say is that you need to be kind to yourself and take self-care when you can. So if you're having that feeling of overwhelmment, and you know you've read 5 books last week, or you've engaged in 5 practices and they're all new and they're all exciting, so I would say yes, pare it down to one practice and focus on that one practice. If it's bringing you, you know, good vibes, if it's making you feel well, if you know, you're feeling grounded in it, then I would continue. If you're feeling a little bit more like it's making you a little manic, or you're feeling depressed, you know, there can be all these different experiences. So if it's not bringing you the health, well-being that you're looking for, then I would sort of put maybe something to the side and then say, what's really nourishing for me now? What can I do now that my body or my mind really needs? And just, yeah, basically be easy on yourself. Don't guilt yourself into thinking that you should be doing everything and all the practices. And it's like, who has time? And also it's like, you know, there'll be time in the future where you can engage in more things. But I think it's really healthy and supportive of your mental health to actually, yeah, slow down, basically.
Yes, I 100% agree with everything that you said. So where can people find you? Where can people find you online?
Yeah, so I've got my art therapy website, which is healingspacesonline.com. And I'm also in the midst, I'll probably have my photography and art therapy, which is a combined service, together, linked to that website as well. So eventually there'll be new offerings and things like that. But currently I have my Spiritual Emergence support on the Healing Spaces website. So
amazing. Amazing. And you're on Instagram as well, aren't you? Yes.
That's right. Yes.
At Healing Spaces Online.
Yes, that's
amazing.
Right.
Cool. Awesome. Well, also, if you haven't followed me on social media yet, you can find me at the Global Conscious Project on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and also on this podcast. Don't forget to subscribe and come and follow me for all things spiritual awakening and raising your vibration. And thank you so much, Lisa, for joining me in this episode 5 podcast. So lovely to have you on, and I just love chatting, and I think that definitely we have to do a part 2 of this to go through the phases of spiritual emergence.
Definitely. Thanks so much for having me, and I definitely think this is like one of those topics where you could talk for hours, so I'm looking forward to part 2.
Yes, let's do it. Awesome.
All right.
Cut. Sorry, I didn't want to cut